In the quiet and deeply traditional village of Mbalo, nestled between ancient trees and dirt paths, lived an old man named Peki. The villagers respected him, but they also feared him. His voice was rough, his rules were many, and his heart seemed frozen in time. Years ago, Beki's son and daughter-in-law had died in a tragic fire that shook the whole village. Left behind was their only child, a gentle girl named Namusa. She was just a baby when it happened, and Beki took her in, not out of love, but out of duty. He raised her in his hut, fed her, clothed her, but never once spoke a word of comfort. His house was always quiet, his rules always loud. While other children laughed and played, Namusa learned to walk on eggshells. The one thing that was strictly forbidden? Mentioning her mother, or going near her grave. Beki believed such things disturbed the spirits and brought curses. So Namusa grew up in silence, grieving in secret, loving in the shadows, and obeying a man whose heart was locked behind pain and pride. Beki was not just a grandfather in Mbalo. He was a man people didn't dare question. His presence alone could silence a room. When he spoke, even the wind seemed to pause. That's why, when he set rules, they were followed. No one challenged them, not even the other elders. Among all his many rules, there was one that stood above the rest. Namusa was never allowed to visit her mother's grave. Not once. Not ever. The grave lay deep within the old Nkalashi forest, under a large fig tree where the earth seemed to breathe with ancient energy. Villagers believed it was a sacred place where spirits slept and listened, but Beki twisted that belief. He told Namusa that visiting the grave would wake angry spirits, that it would curse their home and invite death. He used fear to control her heart. As a child, Namusa didn't understand why. She only knew that every time she even mentioned her mother's name, Beki's eyes turned cold, his voice harsh. He would slam his cane against the floor and tell her, "The dead must sleep, child. Don't disturb them." The first time she asked to go to the grave, she was only 6. She had found an old picture of her mother in a wooden box. Curious, she ran to Beki, smiling, asking who the woman was. The slap she received that day echoed in her memory for years. From that moment, she learned to hide her feelings, to swallow her sadness, and to never bring up her mother again. As she grew older, the longing to connect with her mother's memory only grew stronger. But the fear Beki planted in her heart ran deep. Every time she passed the path toward Nkalashi, her feet slowed, her eyes lingered, but she always turned back. Beki's warnings had become her prison. Even when other villagers whispered about how wrong it was to keep a child from mourning her mother, no one dared to say it to Beki's face. He was, after all, the oldest living member of Mbalo's founding family. People feared his wrath more than they feared the spirits. Namusa often cried alone at night, holding her mother's picture tight against her chest, wondering what kind of woman she was. She imagined her voice, her smile, her embrace, all things she never got to feel. Deep down, a quiet voice inside her told her that her mother would have never wanted her to live in fear. But that voice was always chased away by Beki's louder one, filled with threats of curses and spirits. The rules were law in his house, and breaking them meant punishment. So, Namusa kept her pain hidden behind soft smiles and quiet footsteps, never letting anyone see the storm building inside her heart. Despite her grandfather's strict rules, Namusa couldn't stop thinking about her mother. No matter how many times Beki warned her, or how often he raised his voice, the ache in her heart never went away. Her mother, Thandiwe, was like a shadow in her memory, faint but always present. She had no clear image, no real memories, but her heart carried a love for her mother that felt older than time. Some nights, when the wind outside whispered through the trees, Namusa would close her eyes and imagine her mother singing to her. She imagined soft arms wrapping around her, warm smiles, gentle words. In the dark, she felt closest to her, like her mother's spirit visited her dreams, just to remind her she was never truly alone. Namusa didn't talk to anyone about her feelings, not even Zola, her best friend since they were little. She feared Beki might find out and punish her. But inside, her thoughts kept circling one place, the grave in the Nkalashi forest. Everyone in the village knew it was where Thandiwe was buried. The forest was thick and wild, filled with ancient trees and strange sounds. Some villagers said the forest was magical, others said it was cursed. To Namusa, it was sacred. It was where her mother rested. And no matter how much fear Becky tried to plant in her, the desire to go there only grew stronger with time. She would walk to the edge of the village and stare at the forest line, her feet itching to move forward, her heart pounding with questions. What did the grave look like? Did anyone ever visit it? Did her mother's spirit know how much she missed her? She imagined placing flowers there, kneeling beside the grave and talking to it like a friend. But she knew if Becky ever found out, the punishment would be harsh. The thought scared her, but not enough to kill the longing. Every year on the same day, the day her parents died, Namusa felt her chest tighten. It was the same feeling, as if a string inside her was being pulled toward the forest. Becky would always act strange on that day too. He would stay quiet, barely eat, and sit outside staring at the ground for hours. But still, he never allowed her to speak of it. He pretended nothing happened, and so Namusa was forced to pretend too. But pretending didn't heal anything. Instead, Namusa began keeping little things that reminded her of her mother. A faded scarf, a beaded necklace she once found buried in an old box, and most special of all, a bracelet she had started making herself. It had tiny wooden beads carved with symbols she didn't fully understand, symbols she believed might protect her, or maybe help her connect with her mother's spirit. She planned to finish it one day and leave it at her mother's grave. Each passing year, her longing grew heavier, her silence louder, and though she smiled in front of others and obeyed Becky's every word, inside she was waiting for the moment when she could finally break free of the fear and walk into that forest. She didn't want to disobey. She didn't want to be cursed. She just wanted to feel close to her mother, even for one moment, and deep down, she believed that if her mother's spirit was out there, it was waiting too. On the morning of her mother's death anniversary, Namusa woke up with a heavy heart. The air felt still, and even the birds seemed quieter than usual. She knew this day better than any other. It was the day her life had changed forever, the day her mother left this world. Every year, her heart would ache more, and this year, the ache had turned into something stronger, an unstoppable need. She had waited long enough. She could no longer carry the weight of not saying goodbye properly. No matter what her grandfather said, she had made a decision. She was going to visit her mother's grave. She didn't plan to do it alone. That afternoon, when the sun was just beginning to fall behind the hills, she whispered her plan to Zola. Zola's eyes widened with fear. "Are you sure?" she asked. Namusa nodded, her voice firm. "I have to." Zola hesitated for a moment, but then gave a small supportive smile. "Then I'll come with you." That night, as Becky sat snoring in his old wooden chair, Namusa and Zola slipped out of the hut, careful not to make a sound. The moon was full and bright, casting silver light on the narrow dirt path. With each step, Namusa's heart beat faster. The forest of Nkalashi stood tall and mysterious in front of them, its trees like ancient guards keeping secrets buried in the soil. Namusa had never gone this far alone before. The sounds of insects and distant owls echoed around them, but she kept walking, clutching the small pouch that held her handmade bracelet. She had spent months carving each bead from tiny pieces of wood she found near the river. Some beads were painted, some were smooth, and one had her mother's name scratched in tiny letters. It was her gift, a piece of her heart she wanted to leave at the grave. After what felt like hours, they found it. Tucked beneath a large fig tree, half covered in fallen leaves and flowers, was the simple mound of earth that held her mother's body. There was no stone, no name, just a place that had been left untouched for too long. Namusa stood there, frozen, tears silently falling down her cheeks. Zola stayed back, giving her space. Slowly, Namusa knelt beside the grave and placed the bracelet at the center of the mound. Her hands shook as she touched the soil. She didn't speak loudly, only a soft whisper that carried more meaning than any loud cry ever could. "Mama, I'm here," she said. "I miss you so much." A gentle wind passed through the trees, brushing her face like a soft hand. It felt like peace, like love, like her mother had been waiting for this moment just as much as she had. For a few minutes the world stood still. There was no fear, no rules, no angry voices, only the quiet connection between a daughter and the memory of her mother. But as the wind faded, the fear slowly crept back in. She knew if Becky found out, it would not end well. Still, she didn't regret it. As she and Zola quietly made their way back through the trees, Namusa held her head high. She had done what her heart told her to do. For the first time in her life, She felt a little freer, a little braver, and a little closer to the mother she never got to know. The next morning, the village of Mbalo woke up to the sounds of Becky shouting. His voice was louder than the roosters, echoing through the huts and fields. Nomusa had barely returned home when he discovered her absence. A neighbor had seen two figures walking near the forest late at night and mentioned it in passing. Beki's face turned dark with fury. He stormed into the house, his cane banging against the floor with every step, and demanded the truth. Nomusa stood there trembling, her eyes lowered, but she didn't lie. With quiet bravery, she admitted everything. She had gone to visit her mother's grave. That was all he needed to hear. Within minutes, Beki dragged Nomusa out of the hut and into the village square. Villagers gathered quickly, sensing trouble. Some had never seen Beki so angry. He shouted at them to come closer, yelling that a lesson needed to be taught. Nomusa stood in the middle, shaking, her eyes scanning the faces around her. Some looked away. Others watched in silence. No one stepped forward, not even Zola, who hid behind her mother in tears. Beki raised his cane and, without warning, struck Nomusa across the back. A sharp cry escaped her lips. Again and again, the cane landed, each blow louder than the last. Dust rose around her bare feet as she struggled to stay standing. The villagers gasped, but not one person moved to stop him. They feared him too much. To them, he was still the elder, the one who knew the old ways. If he said she brought curses by visiting the dead, they believed it must be true. As he beat her, Beki shouted warnings to the crowd. "Let this be a lesson," he roared. "The spirits are not to be disturbed. No child, no woman, no man shall disobey me and walk away free." Nomusa's cries faded into silence. Her body hurt, but her heart hurt more. She had gone to her mother's grave with love, with respect, and now, here she was, bruised, humiliated, treated like a criminal in front of everyone she had ever known. She didn't cry out anymore. She just stared at the sky, holding onto the image of her mother's grave, the wind through the trees, and the bracelet she had left behind. When Beki finally stopped, he dropped the cane beside her like it meant nothing. He turned to the villagers one last time and barked, "Let no one forget this day." Then he walked away, leaving Nomusa on the ground, alone. For a moment, there was silence. Then slowly, the villagers turned and began to walk away too. No one helped her. No one spoke. It was as if fear had turned them into shadows. Nomusa didn't move. Her body was weak, her spirit shaken. But deep inside her, something had changed. The fear that once ruled her had cracked. Yes, she had been punished. Yes, she had suffered. But she had also stood up for love. And even though the world around her had turned its back, she knew she had done the right thing. Days passed, but the image of Nomusa's punishment stayed fresh in everyone's minds. The village of Mbalo, once full of chatter and laughter, had turned quiet. People went about their chores, but their eyes often drifted toward Beki's home, where Nomusa remained out of sight. Children stopped playing near the square, and women spoke in low voices, careful not to be overheard. The fear of Beki's wrath still gripped the village, but something had changed. Beneath the silence, the villagers had begun to whisper. It started with the older women at the river, their hands scrubbing clothes, while their mouths shared soft words. "The girl only wanted to honor her mother," one said. "How can that be wrong?" another added. Their voices held sorrow, not anger. They remembered Thandiwe, how kind she was, how her laughter once echoed through the same hills. It felt cruel to deny her child the right to grieve. Even the children noticed. They asked questions their parents struggled to answer. Why did grandfather Beki hurt Nomusa? Wasn't she just missing her mama? The parents gave nervous looks and changed the subject, but the questions hung in the air like smoke. Some of the younger men, who once admired Beki's strength, began to question it. "There's a difference between being firm and being cruel," one whispered to another by the fire. They all remembered the look on Nomusa's face, how brave she was even as she stood there alone, never begging, never breaking. It left a mark on their hearts. In the elders' circle, where decisions for the village were made, the mood had shifted too. Chief Mandla, a wise man with grey eyes, had sat silently through Beki's angry speech a few days ago, but now he stirred in his seat more often, clearing his throat, as if he wanted to say something, but hadn't found the right words. Elder Nandi, one of the oldest women in the village, finally spoke during a small gathering. A child beaten for loving her mother. What spirit do we serve if we allow this? Her voice was calm but heavy with meaning. No one responded out loud, but some nodded quietly. Still, no one dared to challenge Beiki directly. His authority was old and deep-rooted. He had been feared for so long that even those who disagreed with him found it hard to stand against him. And yet, the whispers continued to grow. They spread like wind through tall grass. Quiet, constant, impossible to catch. At the edge of it all was Namusa. Though she stayed hidden inside the hut, her name was on every tongue. People left small gifts by her door, a carved bird, a flower, a bowl of fruit, as a silent way of showing support. They couldn't protect her, not yet, but they wanted her to know she wasn't alone. The village was changing, slowly, quietly, one whisper at a time. And though Beiki still walked tall, his shadow no longer felt as heavy. Something had started, a shift that couldn't be undone. Days later, strange things began to happen around Beiki's hut. At first, it was small, a sudden chill in the air around his home. Even when the sun was high and hot, he started to cough, a dry, sharp cough that wouldn't stop. Villagers said they saw him walking slower, holding his back, whispering to himself. He ignored it at first, brushing off his sickness like it was nothing. But the signs didn't stop. His crops, once green and proud, began to wither for no reason. Tomatoes burst open with rot, maize turned black, and the cassava plants dried up even though the rains had come. In the same yard where children once played and elders came for advice, there was now silence and fear. The air around his hut felt heavy. Even the birds avoided flying near it. Then something even stranger happened. His goats disappeared, all of them. Not a single track in the soil, no broken fences, no noise in the night. They were simply gone. Beiki searched the hills and forests, shouting their names like they were lost children, but no one ever saw the animals again. The village couldn't ignore it anymore. Whispers grew louder. Some believed Beiki was cursed. Others said it was the wrath of the ancestors. And when strange symbols appeared near his door, drawn in ash, shaped like spirals and broken circles, fear turned to panic. No one knew who had made them, but everyone knew what they meant. It was a warning, a sign from the other side. Finally, the elders called Mama Nora, the village's oldest spiritual healer. Her hair was silver like moonlight, and her voice was calm but powerful. She walked with her staff into Beiki's yard, her bare feet untouched by fear. The villagers followed at a distance, curious, whispering prayers under their breath. Mama Nora stood in front of Beiki's door and closed her eyes. She said nothing for a long time. Then she turned to the crowd and spoke with a voice that cut through the silence. "The ancestors are not pleased," she said. A gasp moved through the people like wind. Beiki's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to argue, but Mama Nora raised her hand. "You broke the sacred bond between a child and her blood," she said. "You turned love into shame. You beat a girl for remembering her mother. The spirits have seen it all." Beiki tried to defend himself, but his voice cracked. "She disobeyed me," he muttered. "She brought danger." Mama Nora looked at him with pity. "No," she said. "You brought danger to yourself." The villagers stood in stunned silence. The once feared elder now looked small, standing in the ruins of his yard, coughing and alone. People slowly backed away, not knowing what would happen next. But deep in their hearts, they understood one thing clearly. Beiki was no longer protected. Something had shifted. The spirits had spoken, and now karma had begun its work. Mama Nora revealed the truth with a quiet, steady voice that sent chills through the crowd. "Thandiwe's spirit," she began, "was never laid to rest." Her eyes locked onto Beiki, who stood pale and trembling near the back. "When your son died, and Thandiwe passed not long after, you refused to perform the last rites for her. You called her cursed. You said she brought misfortune. You buried her in silence, without prayers, without honor. That silence is what has brought this darkness upon you." Gasps moved through the crowd like wind. People looked at one another in disbelief. Some covered their mouths. Others bowed their heads. They remembered Thandiwe, her laughter, her kindness. She had not deserved such a fate, but Beiki had shut down all talk about her, forbidding anyone from visiting her grave, forbidding even her daughter from mourning. Mama Nora stepped forward, her voice growing stronger. Namusa's visit to her mother's grave was not rebellion. It was healing. It was love. A mother's spirit cannot rest while her child's heart remains broken. The ancestors watched as the girl walked into the sacred forest with nothing but a bracelet and a prayer, and they wept when you beat her for it. Beki's knees buckled slightly, but he remained standing, staring at the ground. His mouth quivered, but no words came. "She has done what you would not," Mama Noor continued. "She honored the dead. She reached out with pure heart, and in doing so, she awakened the spirits. Not in anger, but in sorrow. They did not curse you at first, but when you punished love, they could no longer stay silent. The villagers were still. Not even the birds sang. It felt as if time had paused to let the truth sink in." Mama Nora turned to the people. "Let it be known," she said. "Namusa is not the one who brought this upon Mbalo. It was silence. It was pride. It was forgetting that love and grief are sacred." Then her gaze returned to Beki. "You still have a choice," she said. "You can continue in shame and sickness, or you can make it right." Beki, broken and tired, finally looked up. His eyes were red, his face worn. For the first time in many years, he looked less like a powerful elder and more like a man who had lost everything. The crowd waited. No one spoke. No one moved. And deep in the center of it all, Namusa stood quietly, holding back tears, not of fear, but of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the truth could begin to heal what pain had destroyed. As days passed, Beki's condition worsened. His strength faded like smoke in the wind. The once powerful elder could barely sit up, let alone walk through the village with his cane like he used to. His hut was quiet, the walls echoing with his coughs and whispers. Most villagers stayed away, still unsure whether he was cursed or simply facing the consequences of his own cruelty. But Namusa came every single day. She had no reason to. After everything he had done, beating her, humiliating her, no one would have blamed her for turning away. But her heart was different, kind, forgiving. She would quietly enter the yard each morning with a small bowl of porridge, a jug of clean water, and place them beside his door. She didn't speak much, just bowed her head and left. Beki would watch her from the shadows inside, too ashamed to call out, too weak to stop her. The villagers noticed. They whispered about her, but this time with admiration. "She still brings him food," they said, "even after what he did." Some called her foolish, but most called her brave. To them, Namusa had become a quiet light in a village still recovering from fear. One night, the air grew heavy and the moon hid behind the clouds. Beki lay in his bed, unable to sleep. His body ached and his mind was filled with memories of his son, of Thandiw, of the day he struck Namusa. Guilt pressed down on his chest like a rock. He whispered to the darkness, "I was trying to protect her. I didn't know. I didn't know." Then suddenly, the room grew cold. A soft glow appeared at the edge of his bed. At first, he thought it was a dream, but then he saw her, Thandiwe. Her spirit stood before him, not with anger, but peace. Her eyes were filled with sadness, but also something more powerful, forgiveness. "You were afraid," she said softly, "but fear turned your heart hard. Still, my daughter, she loves you. She honors what you could not." Tears ran down Beki's face. He reached out his hand, but Thandiwe only smiled. "You can heal, Beki, but only if you learn to love again." And just like that, she was gone. The next morning, for the first time in weeks, Beki sat up on his own. His cough had eased. His body felt lighter. When Namusa arrived with water, he looked her in the eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a broken, trembling voice, he whispered, "Thank you, my child." Namusa nodded gently. No tears, no anger, just a quiet understanding between two broken hearts beginning to mend. From that day, Beki slowly began to heal, not just his body, but his spirit. And the village, once divided by fear, began to heal with him. Beki publicly apologized in front of the entire village, standing in the very center of the square where he once ruled with pride and fear. His voice trembled at first, but he didn't hide behind his age or authority. He faced the people, his people, with open eyes and a bowed head. "I was wrong," he said. "I let my fear silence the truth. I punished my granddaughter for remembering her mother. I refused to lay Thandaiw's spirit to rest, thinking I was protecting tradition, but I was only protecting my pride, and for that, I ask for your forgiveness." The villagers stood in stunned silence. Some had waited years to hear these words. Others had never imagined he'd say them. But as he spoke, a wave of quiet understanding moved through the crowd. "I no longer want to lead with fear," Beiki continued. "I want to lead with love, with truth, and with the blessings of the ancestors who have watched over us, even in silence." With Mamanore's guidance, Beiki led the village in a sacred ceremony unlike any before. For the first time, the people returned together to the sacred forest of Nkalashi, this time not in secret or shame, but in unity. At Thandiv's grave, Beiki knelt beside Namusa. He placed his hands on the soil and whispered an apology that only the spirits could hear. Namusa stood beside him, no longer just a granddaughter, but a symbol of strength and healing. She placed new beads beside the grave, brighter and stronger than before, woven with colors that represented forgiveness, love, and rebirth. The villagers joined hands around them, and together they sang, softly at first, then stronger, their voices rising into the sky. The ceremony was a moment of peace, but also a promise that the village would no longer silence grief. That tradition would walk hand in hand with compassion, that no child would ever be punished again for remembering love. From that day on, things began to change. Elders invited the young to speak. Stories once hidden were shared with honor. Women's wisdom was welcomed into village decisions. And Namusa, the girl once beaten for visiting a grave, became known as the bridge between two worlds, the living and the ancestral, the old and the new. Beiki, now slower and softer, spent his days teaching not rules, but lessons, real lessons, about love, about regret, and about the strength it takes to say sorry. The village of Mbalo had been wounded, but it had also healed, not by forgetting the past, but by facing it. And in the heart of that healing stood a girl, her spirit unbroken, her voice finally heard.